She held his hand at his deathbed, her heart heavy, completely unaware that his next words would change everything. In that sweltering late afternoon, he looked into her eyes with a kind of pain that went far beyond illness. "I lied to you for 32 years, and what I have to tell you is going to destroy you." She thought it might be something simple, an old affair, a hidden debt, maybe a child that was never born. But no, what he revealed in the next few minutes went straight to the core of who she was. It stirred up the deepest parts of her past: blood, family, her sister, who she hadn't seen in decades, and a daughter, who wasn't hers, but had always been nearby. New Orleans had that way of hiding scars beneath its beauty. Cobblestone streets, jazz floating through open windows, the smell of jasmine in the air. But Lorna knew that behind the city's vibrant colors were wounds that never truly healed. Just like the words that had never been spoken, just like the look in her husband Harlan's eyes, lying in that hospital bed, struggling for breath, but with something urgent burning in his chest. It was late afternoon. The sun was casting a warm, melancholy orange across the wall of room 214. The beeping of the machines was steady, a survival symphony, and in that moment, she knew she was hearing a final request. Even before he spoke a word, she sat on the edge of the bed holding his hand tightly. His touch was still the same, rough, calloused, but steady. Harlan had been her rock for 32 years. They weren't perfect, but there had been love, and that had always been enough. "Harlan, do you want me to call someone?" she asked, thinking maybe he meant a priest or his brother who lived in Baton Rouge. But he slowly shook his head. "Just you." She swallowed hard. The silence between them was thick, almost tangible. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice faint and worn, like each word was being pulled out of him with tweezers. "I lied to you, Lorna, for 32 years. Time froze. Her hand trembled in his. It was like the hospital had disappeared for a moment. Outside, the city kept on going, completely oblivious to the earthquake that had just begun in that room. She couldn't say a word. She just looked at him, waiting for him to explain. "I need you to promise you'll listen to the whole thing," he whispered, struggling. "Don't leave. Don't hate me until you've heard everything." She wanted to ask why, wanted to scream, "What did you do?" But instead she just nodded. The fear of what was coming was stronger than the anger already starting to boil inside her. "I had a daughter," he began, staring at the ceiling. "Before I met you." Lorna felt her chest tighten. That alone was a gut punch. 32 years together and he'd never mentioned it? Not once? "But there's more," he went on, swallowing hard. The woman I had that child with, she's someone you know. Someone who was part of your life." Her mouth went dry. "Harlan." "Who?" He hesitated, closed his eyes, took a deep breath like he was diving into a dark well. "Dahlia." Lorna felt the world spin. The name sounded like a ghost from the past. "My sister?" Harlan nodded, and everything fell apart. Lorna stepped back. Then again, the hospital floor felt like it was melting beneath her. Dahlia. The sister she'd cut ties with when they were still young. The sister she hadn't seen since that summer everything collapsed at their parents' house. The sister who, according to their mother, had disappeared for good and never came back. You had a daughter with my sister?" Harlan started coughing, his chest heaving with effort. The monitors beeped faster. A nurse rushed in, asked Lorna to step back, adjusted his IV, said something Lorna couldn't hear. She was there, but not really. She was somewhere between now and back then, trying to process what she'd just heard. When things calmed down, she stepped closer again. Her hands were shaking. Her legs felt like glass. "Where is she, Harlan?" He looked at her with eyes full of pain and tears. "She never left, Lorna. She always knew about you." The words hit like thunder. Her heart was pounding. "What do you mean?" But before he could answer, his breathing started to falter. A new alarm went off. The medical team rushed in, and Lorna stood there again, holding his hand. This time with a million questions screaming in her mind and one chilling certainty settling into her chest. She didn't know the man she'd spent her whole life with, and the truth was only just beginning to come out of the shadows. Lorna couldn't sleep that night. The hospital room had emptied after the doctors stabilized Harlan and said he needed rest, but rest never came for her. While he slept, tethered to wires and machines that mimicked life, She wandered the halls of Oxner Medical Center like someone fleeing an invisible fire. Each step echoed in her mind alongside that name, Dahlia. Just hearing it left a bitter taste in her mouth. The sister she hadn't seen in over 30 years. The sister who at 19 had stormed out of their parents' house after a violent fight with their father and never came back. She got mixed up with the wrong crowd, their mother used to say, like someone slamming a door shut and locking it tight. She turned into someone else. Lorna grew up learning that forgetting was easier than looking, and over time, Dahlia had become nothing more than an empty space in the family photos. But now, all of it was crashing back with force, with violence. Dahlia wasn't just alive. She'd had a child, a daughter, with Harlan, the same man Lorna had shared her life with for 32 years. She tried to remember if, at any point, he'd mentioned Dahlia, or maybe flinched when her name came up, even in passing. But no, Harlan had always been discreet, yes, but loving. He never seemed like someone hiding something this big. Never. And then came the question she feared most. Who is this daughter? Where is she? Does she know Lorna? Has she been close all along? Could they have crossed paths without knowing? Lorna went home alone that night. The house on Piety Street in Bywater felt smaller than usual. The walls seemed to carry too many stories now. Every room held memories of her and Harlan. Simple dinners on the porch, nights listening to jazz on the old radio, Sunday mornings filled with the smell of coffee and cornbread. She sat on the couch, hugging one of his pillows, her mind spinning. Around 3 a.m, she opened the file cabinet and pulled out the blue shoebox Harlan always said was full of old junk. She'd never gone through it, always respected his space. But now she had to know. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings, receipts, a few worn letters, and there at the bottom of the box, folded like a secret that should have stayed buried, was an old photograph. Dahlia. There was no doubt it was her. Younger, long hair, wide smile. Next to her a man, Harlan, and in Dahlia's arms, a baby. Lorna felt her stomach twist. The photo trembled in her hands. On the back, written in shaky black ink, Dahlia, Harlan, and baby Eve. August 1993. Eve. The daughter had a name. And judging by the handwriting, he was the one who wrote it. Lorna sat there, staring at the name like it was an open wound. Then, a memory hit her, so vivid and out of place that she had to brace herself against the wall. The substitute teacher from the school where she'd worked for years. Her name was Eve. Eve Collier. Dark hair, serious eyes, very polite. She'd started teaching there back in 2018. Young, but with a calm, mature demeanor. They'd never been close, but Lorna remembered her clearly, especially something that had seemed trivial at the time. One day, while organizing supplies for a book fair, Eve had casually said, "I love old jazz. My stepdad used to play sax." Lorna had smiled. "So does my husband, can you believe that?" Eve smiled back, said nothing. Back then, it had seemed like a coincidence. Now, it felt like a piece of a very dark puzzle. Lorna jumped up, grabbed her phone and typed into Google, Eve Collier, New Orleans. The name popped up. LinkedIn profile, teacher, currently working at a community center in Treme. She was still here, and maybe she knew everything. Lorna's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Everything was starting to make sense and at the same time, made no sense at all. She looked at the photo again. Dahlia seemed so alive in it, so present. And Harlan, how could he have hidden all this for more than 3 decades? She needed answers, but more than that, she needed to face the truth, because if Eve really was who she now believed, then her entire life had been built on silence. And what else hadn't Harlan told her? Lorna couldn't get her name out of her head. Eve. It was like a song she'd never noticed playing in the background, until suddenly, it was too loud to ignore. The young teacher's face, her deep, serious eyes, that steady, composed presence, it all held a different meaning now. She spent the next day drifting between the hospital and her own home, as if she were stuck in some alternate reality. She watched her husband sleep under the cold light of the monitors, struggling for each breath, and wondered, how could he look me in the eye all these years and hide something so devastatingly intimate? It wasn't just about the daughter. It was about Dahlia, the sister Lorna had buried deep inside herself, along with everything she'd ever felt for her. Anger, guilt, longing. But now, Dahlia had a living face in the world, And that face had stood in front of Lorna for years, under another name, playing another role, wrapped in silence. On Tuesday morning, while Harlan lay sedated, Lorna made a decision. She got in her car and drove to Treme, a historic neighborhood that breathed resilience and pain, where bold-colored murals covered the walls and the streets whispered old stories. The community center was modest, but well cared for. A hand-painted mural showed smiling children, musical instruments, and books. Inside, time seemed to move slower. She walked in cautiously and asked for Eve Collier. The receptionist, a kind woman with silver braids, smiled warmly. "Sure, she's helping out in the library. Last room in the back." Lorna nodded in thanks and walked down the hallway, her legs weakening with every step. When she reached the door, she paused, took a deep breath, knocked. "Come in," came the voice from inside. She pushed the door open slowly, and there she was, Eve, sitting cross-legged on the floor, sorting piles of children's books, dressed in jeans and a black t-shirt, her hair pulled into a simple bun. When she saw Lorna, she looked up. Her expression shifted from surprise to something Lorna couldn't quite name. Silence. "Ms. Collier," Lorna began, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can I speak with you for a minute?" Eve stood slowly, wiping her hands on her jeans. Her eyes were alert, guarded. "Of course, did something happen?" Lorna swallowed hard. "It's about my husband, Harlan." The name landed between them like a stone. Eve didn't react right away, but her eyes dropped slightly, almost imperceptibly, like something had just been confirmed. Like a door inside her, locked for years, had been kicked open without warning. "He's sick," Lorna continued. "Terminal, and yesterday, he told me." Silence again. Thick, charged. "Told you what?" "About Dahlia." The name made Eve blink slowly, as if she'd just been slapped. Lorna went on. "And about you." Eve didn't move. She just crossed her arms, but her breathing grew heavier. "He told you everything?" the young woman asked after a few seconds. "He told me enough to bring me here." Eve nodded, like someone who understood even if she didn't agree. She walked over to the window and stood there, watching the street outside. She looked older than she was, like life had made sure to put her in the middle of things she never asked for. "I knew who you were," she said suddenly, without turning around. "From the first day we met, when you welcomed me with that veteran teacher smile, I knew I was looking at the woman who grew up with my mom." "Who was her sister?" Lorna felt a tightness in her chest. "Why didn't you say anything?" Eve turned to her, eyes glossy but composed. "Because I grew up learning not to expect anything from you, from any of you. My mom, she didn't talk much, but I saw it in her eyes. The pain, the shame, the feeling of being erased. She loved you, all of you, but you acted like she never existed." Lorna lowered her gaze. She had no defense, because deep down, it was true. "I didn't know. I mean it. I thought Dahlia had died? Run away? Become another sad statistic?" Eve cut in, bitterness lacing her voice. "It was easier to think that, wasn't it?" The silence between them had shifted. It was no longer tense. It was sad. "Is she alive?" Lorna asked, almost a whisper. Eve nodded. "Yeah, but a lot of who she was died a long time ago." Lorna felt her eyes welling. She didn't know if the tears were for Dahlia, for Harlan, for herself, or for the girl standing in front of her, who had grown up carrying the wreckage of what everyone else destroyed. "I want to meet her, apologize, look her in the eyes, and I don't know if she wants that." Eve cut in gently. "But I can try. I'll tell her you know now, that you want to talk." Lorna nodded. That was all she could hope for. Eve moved toward the door as if she needed to end the conversation before it unraveled her. But before stepping out, she looked back at Lorna one last time. "He loved you, you know?" Lorna didn't respond. The lump in her throat was too big. And there, in that hallway lined with worn tiles and the scent of books, she realized that love sometimes comes with cracks. That truth, when it arrives late, doesn't fix everything, but it does start to clear a path. The sound of the heart monitor felt louder that night, as if Harlan's heart wasn't just struggling against the illness, but against the weight of everything he still carried. Lorna stepped into the room slowly, like she was walking into a minefield. She held a bottle of sparkling water, his favorite, in one hand, and what little courage she had left in her chest. Her conversation with Eve at the community center echoed like distant thunder in her mind. Every word, every glance, every silence. She couldn't tell if she felt more anger or compassion. The two feelings swirled inside her like paint in dirty water. Harlan was awake. He was staring out the window, where the full moon bathed the city in pale, lonely light. When he heard her footsteps, he turned slowly. His eyes were sunken, but alive. He knew she had learned more than what he'd confessed. "You talked to her," he said, before Lorna could speak. She nodded, placing the water bottle on the table beside his bed. "I did. I talked to Eve." Harlan lowered his gaze, took a deep breath. "I should have told you a long time ago." "You should have," Lorna said, without hesitation. "But you didn't. And now everything's in ruins, Harlan, my sister, your daughter. They were right here all around me. And you let me live in ignorance." He ran a weak hand down his face. His expression was one of pain, both physical and emotional. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I buried it deep enough we could live in peace." "Peace built on lies doesn't last, Harlan." Silence. She sat beside him, but didn't touch him. The space between them felt new, raw. "Why her?" Lorna asked, voice trembling. "Why, Dahlia?" He took a long time to respond, closed his eyes as if trying to stitch old memories into words he could say out loud. "It was after that fight with your father, when Dahlia left home with nowhere to go. You remember?" Lorna nodded slowly. "I found her one night. It was raining. I was working at a jazz bar on St. Claude Avenue and she showed up, soaked, scared, no place to sleep." His voice cracked between sentences, but he pushed through. "We started talking. She came back often. She had no one, and I was just as lost. We clung to each other. It happened fast, intense, desperate." Lorna felt her stomach twist. Her sister's name tangled with her husband's was something she couldn't reconcile, even with context. "And then she got pregnant?" Harlan nodded. "She wanted to keep the baby, said it would be the only thing that was truly hers. I tried to make it work, but Dahlia was always restless, hurt. After Eve was born, something in her changed. She got quieter, angrier, started drinking, pulling away." He swallowed hard. "One day she just disappeared, took the baby and vanished. I looked, for months. Nothing, no sign, and I gave up, buried myself in work. That's when I met you." Lorna stared at him, her eyes glistening. "And when she came back?" Harlan hesitated, the first uncomfortable pause in their conversation. "It was many years later. Eve was already a teenager. Dahlia sent a letter, said she'd forgiven the past but she wanted to raise her daughter alone. And she asked me not to tell you. And you obeyed," Lorna said, her voice cold. "I thought it was the right thing, that there was no point digging it all back up." She shook her head, bitterness spilling through her words. "Did you do that for her? Or for yourself?" Silence. Harlan didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence spoke for him. "And Eve?" she asked. "Did you see her after that?" Again he hesitated. This time the pause stretched too long. "Harlan?" He looked at her, eyes weary and wet. "I did." Lorna's breath caught. "When?" "A few times, in secret. She'd reach out now and then. We wrote letters, grabbed coffee once in a while. She never called me Dad, but I was there, from a distance, the only way I could be." Lorna brought her hand to her mouth. That was the final blow. He hadn't just known about the daughter. He'd seen her, kept her close, while Lorna remained in the dark. "Oh my God, Harlan." She stood, pacing the room like the air had turned toxic. Her head was spinning, her hands trembled. "You let me work beside my sister's daughter, your daughter, for years. You let me trust her, care for her, as a colleague, as a person, while you lived this lie." Harlan tried to sit up but coughed hard. The monitor let out a sharp beep. He clutched his chest. Lorna rushed to help him, calling for the nurse. A few tense minutes of meds and adjustments followed. The room settled, but the conversation hung in the air, unfinished. When things returned to normal, Lorna held his hand. Her eyes were red, but something else had crept in now, a growing fear. She could see he was fading, and maybe, just maybe, there wasn't enough time left to hear the rest. "There's more, isn't there?" Harlan tried to answer. His lips moved, but no sound came out. She squeezed his hand. Harlan, tell me. I need to know. He tried again, but pain overtook him. His eyes shut. His body surrendered to exhaustion, and the confession was left unfinished. Lorna sat there once again alone, surrounded by questions that burned even more than the answers ever could. The room was silent after the nurses left. Harlan was asleep, or in that strange in-between place, somewhere between this world and whatever came next. Lorna sat beside him, still, listening to the soft beeping of the monitors. His body was there, but his soul felt farther and farther away. The confession, it hung in the air, like a book closed just before the final page. She knew there was more. She could feel it in her chest. Harlan had hesitated. There was something else, something bigger. And now, maybe it was too late for him to say it out loud. She looked at him and even through the pain felt a kind of longing. This man, so human, so flawed, had been her love, her home, and now he was also the source of the deepest fracture in her life. Why did he stop? What didn't he have the courage to say? Lorna went home that afternoon. She needed air, space, to think, to be alone. But as soon as she stepped inside, she saw an envelope on the floor. White, no return address. Just her name, handwritten, Lorna Hastings. Her heart skipped. She opened it slowly. Inside, a single sheet of notebook paper, folded in half, written in a steady and familiar hand. Eve. Lorna, I was hoping he'd tell you everything, but I doubted he'd have the strength. He was weak in many ways, but in others he truly tried to protect what he loved. He just didn't know how. The truth that's still missing, the one that might break you, is that my mother didn't leave by choice. She was taken from me. Dahlia wanted to come home. She wanted to make things right. She wanted you back in her life, but someone stopped her. That someone was your mother. She found out about the pregnancy, found out Dahlia was with Harlan, and she forced her out of town with a threat Dahlia never had the strength to face. She promised that if Dahlia ever came back, she'd take her child. She'd tell everyone Dahlia was unstable, that no one would ever let her raise her daughter. My mother was afraid and angry. She raised me alone, but she never healed. She carried that pain in silence. And the worst part? Harlan knew. He knew everything. He tried to protect her, yes, but he also stayed silent when his voice could have changed everything. Now you know, and I deserve to know you. If you want to, I'll be at Café du Monde tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eve. Lorna sank to the floor, the letter trembling in her hands. Her mother, the woman who had always been strict, devout, proper, the one who enforced rules, who said some shames shouldn't be spoken of, who insisted that real family didn't get tangled up in scandal. Now it all made sense. Her rigidity, the silence around Dahlia, the urgency to erase her younger daughter as if she'd never existed. Lorna tried to remember a time her mother had cried over Dahlia. She couldn't. The truth hurt more than any lie. Dahlia didn't run away. She was banished. And the one who claimed to protect the family had been the one to break it the most. And Harlan, he knew, and said nothing. At 2:50 the next day, Lorna was already seated at Café du Monde, her hands slightly shaking as she watched tourists snap photos and servers deliver beignets dusted in powdered sugar. But it all felt hazy, like the world kept moving, and she was stuck in place. At exactly 3 p.m., Eve arrived. She wore a simple dress, sandals, and an expression that wasn't angry. It was tired. Lorna stood. They looked at each other for a long moment. There were no words big enough, so Eve simply opened her arms, and Lorna broke down. She cried harder than she had in 30 years. Cried for Dahlia, for Harlan, for herself, for all the letters that had never been written. After the embrace, they sat down. "Your grandmother," Lorna began, voice rough with emotion. She loved me, but in her own way. By controlling, shaping. She taught me the world was divided into right and wrong. And my sister, she was told she'd chosen the wrong side. Eve looked at her, calm and steady. My mother just wanted to be accepted. She just wanted to come back. Lorna nodded, eyes full. I never went after her. I believed what I was told. I became part of the silence. And now she hates me. And she should. Eve reached across the table and gently took her hand. She doesn't hate you. She's protecting herself. But she never forgot you. Lorna looked at the young woman in front of her, and for the first time, she truly saw what had been there all along. Dahlia's features, Her eyes, her posture, that quiet way of watching the world, like she was always listening deeper than anyone else knew. And now came the question Lorna had been circling in her mind. Was there still time to fix any of this? Eve seemed to read her thoughts. I can try to bring you two together, if you want. Lorna took a deep breath. The world felt like it had cracked open just slightly. I want to, even if it hurts. And there, in the thick New Orleans afternoon, surrounded by wandering tourists and ghosts of the past, the two of them held hands tightly. The meeting was set for late afternoon, in a modest house in the Gentilly neighborhood, far from the tourist buzz of New Orleans, a place where the wind carried dust and old memories, and time seemed to move a little slower. Eve had arranged it. She said her mother had agreed to talk but promised nothing beyond that. She's still bleeding, Lorna, but she'll listen. Lorna spent the entire day with cold hands. She stared at her reflection in the mirror for what felt like hours, trying to see the older sister she used to be, trying to find the exact point where everything had come undone. Was there a single moment when she stopped fighting for Dahlia, or had it been a slow accumulation of silence? At 5:12 p.m., she parked in front of the small, pale blue wooden house, took a deep breath, and got out. Dahlia answered the door. The shock of seeing her was almost physical. She was thinner than Lorna remembered. Her hair had streaks of gray, pulled into a loose bun. Her eyes, the same deep ones from their childhood, now held fatigue and suspicion. They stared at each other for a long, heavy moment. No hug, no warm words. Then Dahlia said, "Come in, before I change my mind." Lorna stepped inside, swallowing the lump in her throat. The house smelled of fresh coffee and old wood. There was a throw blanket on the couch, a photo of Eve on the shelf, and books stacked everywhere. They sat at the kitchen table. Dahlia poured coffee without asking, and stayed quiet for a few more minutes. It felt like she was studying Lorna, trying to decide if this moment was even real. "So," she finally said, with a bitter smile, "32 years later, you remember you have a sister?" Lorna lowered her gaze. "I never forgot you, Dahlia. I just stopped looking. I thought you chose to disappear." "I didn't choose anything, Lorna. I was pushed out. By our mother. By you." Lorna nodded, her throat tightening. "I know. That's why I'm here. To listen. And to ask for forgiveness. Not because it'll fix anything, but because I can't keep living with this emptiness." Dahlia let out a humorless laugh. Forgiveness is easy when the one asking doesn't know what it's like to live with shame, fear, loneliness. I was called a whore, ungrateful, crazy. I slept in shelters with Eve in my arms. I swallowed every damn tear just to give her a chance. While you... She stopped. Her voice broke. "You were the pride of the house, the perfect daughter, the one who stayed, the one who said nothing." Lorna let the tears fall. There was no point in holding them back. "I was a coward, and I thought I was being loyal, but I was weak. It hurt too much to imagine you broken. And instead of finding you, of holding you, I looked away." Dahlia said nothing. "Did you love him?" she asked suddenly. Lorna knew who she meant. "Harlan?" Her sister nodded. Lorna looked down at her cup of coffee, thought for a moment. "I loved him. So much. And now, I don't know. He gave me a good life, Dahlia, but he built it on a lie that erased you. That erased Eve. That erased even me." Dahlia took a deep breath. For the first time, her eyes seemed a little softer. "He loved me too, in the beginning. But he took the easier road. Harlan always did. He ran from pain." Lorna nodded. There was no argument left. "He's dying," she said quietly. "He might not see tomorrow." Dahlia looked down. "Eve told me. He wanted to see you. Before the end." Dahlia's face tightened with a mix of anger and grief. "I don't know if I can. I don't know if I want to. Just think about it. For him, for yourself, for her." And then, for the first time in 32 years, Dahlia reached out. She placed her hand over Lorna's. The touch was hesitant but real. Alive. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Lorna. But I can listen." Lorna wept again. And they sat there. Sisters, finally. Not like before. Not like they once dreamed. But in the only way life had allowed. The next morning, Harlan took a turn for the worse. The hospital called at 6 a.m. Lorna rushed there, finding the room already filled with silence. His eyes were open, but dull. The nurse said it was just a matter of hours. Lorna held his hand. She didn't say much, she just stayed with him. And then, the door opened. Dahlia stepped in, slowly, cautiously, like a ghost. She stopped beside the bed. Harlan's eyes moved. Slowly they found hers, and he wept. No sound, no words, just thin tears slipping from the corners of his eyes. Dahlia stepped closer, touched his arm. "I know," she whispered, "but now, rest." And finally, he did. They knew the road ahead would be long, but for the first time, there was a road. Harlan's burial took place on a warm afternoon like so many others in New Orleans. Sunlight filtered through the trees of Lafayette Cemetery, and the scent of flowers mingled with the faint smell of damp earth. There was no big ceremony, just a few quiet words from the pastor of the church he occasionally attended, and the respectful silence of the few who had come. Lorna stood beside the coffin, dressed in a simple black dress, her eyes hollow from too many sleepless nights. Beside her stood Eve, a step behind, watching with a composed stillness. And finally Dahlia, wearing a dark blue dress, sunglasses, and an unreadable expression. No one cried in public. The pain was too personal to be shared there. After the burial, Lorna returned home alone. The same house on Piety Street. The house that now felt larger, quieter, emptier. Harlan's saxophone still rested in the corner of the living room, leaning against the bookshelf as if waiting for the next rehearsal. She ran her fingers across it gently. He lied to me, but he loved me in his own way. That was the confusion that consumed her. Harlan wasn't a monster. He was an ordinary man who made wrong choices, who wore silence like armor, and paid for it with his last breath. In the days that followed, Lorna and Dahlia saw each other a few times. They had lunch in near silence, strolled together through old streets in the French Quarter, and looked through old photos Lorna had kept in boxes long forgotten in the attic. They didn't talk much, but something had changed between them. They were present. There was no pretending, no rewriting history. They weren't trying to be the sisters they once were, but they were allowing something new to take shape, even if fragile, even if nameless. Eve, meanwhile, became the bridge, the thread between two generations marked by silence and omission. She was calm, observant, and without trying, she naturally became the one who saw it all with clearer eyes. One evening, the three of them sat on Lorna's porch sharing a bottle of cheap wine and laughing at some old memory. From childhood, from school, from a neighbor who used to talk to cats. It was the first genuine laugh in a long, long time. Later that night, just before leaving, Dahlia looked at her sister, her eyes softer than before. "You know what hurt me the most?" she said quietly. "It wasn't that you stayed. It was that you never wrote. Not a letter, not even a note." Lorna nodded, holding back tears. "I did write. I just never sent them. I was afraid I'd only hurt you more, or that it was already too late." Dahlia looked up at the starry sky. "It's never too late for someone who still wants to speak. And now, at least we're speaking." There it was, a thread of reconnection. Months later, Lorna decided to sell the house, not to erase the past, but to begin a new one, something lighter. She found a small apartment near Magazine Street, with a balcony, good light, and just enough space for a fresh start. A place where the silence didn't echo quite as much. Harlan's saxophone was donated to a community project in the lower 9th Ward, where kids learned music after school. Eve's idea. Lorna agreed with a tired but genuine smile. "Maybe now it'll finally play for something good," she said. On the last day of the year, Dahlia showed up unannounced. She carried a small envelope, yellowed with time. "I found this in the back of a drawer. It's yours." Lorna opened it carefully. Inside was an old handwritten letter. She recognized the handwriting instantly. It was from their mother, dated 1995. "Lorna, if you're reading this, it means some part of me still wanted to be forgiven. I did what I thought was right. I protected you from your sister because I believed she was a threat. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was pride, or fear, or selfishness. You were everything I could control. And Dahlia was the part of me I wanted to forget. If you and she ever find each other again, tell her that well, maybe you already know the rest. With love, Mom." Lorna closed her eyes. The letter was short, incomplete, but still, a crack in the wall. She held it out to Dahlia. "Do you want it?" Dahlia shook her head. "No, it's yours." But thank you for showing me." The two embraced. Really embraced. As if 30 years of silence were finally too tired to stand between them. On the first morning of the new year, Lorna woke up early, opened the windows, and made coffee. For 3. Eve arrived at 9. Dahlia at 9:30. At the table they shared bread, memories, and silences. What remained after everything? There was love. Awkward, patched up, imperfect, but still alive. There was the courage to face the past without looking away. There was the quiet certainty that even at the end, truth is worth it. And there was the sound of Harlan's saxophone echoing through memory, not as sorrow, but as farewell. If this story moved you, there's another waiting on your screen right now, one you just might love even more. I'll meet you there.